All right, guys, welcome back to Decoding Babylon, and we have a real treat today. We got Derek Olson, Stargate Voyager, Ancient Expeditions, Megalithic Marvels. We talked about all his names, but man, like the stuff you do, the stuff you reveal. I mean, I'm blown away, and like I said, I couldn't wait for this podcast to talk to you.
I'm honored to be on with you guys, and thanks for the invite. And I'm excited about some of the stuff we're going to get into, some of these topics. I think hopefully the audience is in for a treat here.
Because people don't know, obviously, this is the first time you've been on the podcast. Like, what would you say that your content focuses on?
Yeah, I've always been enthralled with ancient history, and so most of my content is related to ancient history, but then what I would call hidden history, right?
Mm-hmm.
We know there's fake news. Well, there's also a thing called fake history, because those who control the past can control the future. And so I love getting into topics of lost civilizations. And I love going out around the world to these locations and looking for evidence of lost ancient technology. Because to me, that's really the smoking gun, or one of them, that there's way more going on than we've been led to believe. You know, when you kind of start to understand the geology of the stone and what the mainstream says, if they say, well, the Inca built this, but the Inca had copper chisels and hammers, and this is harder. This is granite. How could that be, right? So I love getting into those things and just learning about history, meeting people like you guys in these spaces, and that's kind of my wheelhouse.
Yeah. So would you say that this is my perspective, and maybe this will be a leading question, but when they say they obviously cut these stones with these tools because this is all they had, instead of them maybe having to think outside of their own first theory, you say, wait a minute, they could not have been the ones to make these structures because the tools they have would not make these things. Instead, so now they have to rest on this ridiculous first interpretation, and it's like they don't allow any other theories. Is that you think that that's the case, or why do they push such ridiculous theories about who, when, and what?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. The Inca were an incredible culture, and they were amazing craftsmen in their own light in the 1400s. But again, when you just look at the archaeological record, they had copper chisels and hammers. And when you go to most of these sites in Peru, what you're going to see is 90% Inca construction. Like if you Google Machu Picchu, you're going to see 90% of all the images are Inca. It's these kind of small, rough stones mixed together with clay mortar in the middle. But they're all on top of these precision megalithic foundations that you can't fit a piece of paper through.
Right.
So there's two distinct things going on. But to get to your question, I think the reason they say, that was just the Inca, or if you're in Egypt, for example, they give the dynastic Egyptians, the guys who lived about 3000 BC, King Tut and all these guys, they give them the credit for building the pyramids as tombs and all these megalithic temples. But you got the same problem there.
Yes.
So why the cover up? And I think the answer is because they don't want us asking further questions. Because when you get to Egypt and you start to learn about the geology of the stone, and you realize all these megalithic temples were they were fertility centers and healing centers.
Interesting.
Where these ancients would pass through one side and they would literally regenerate their bodies using the magnetism, the ley lines, the geology. And the point is they didn't need meds, right?
Wow.
And so you start to get into it, and if you realize, I guess, that there was a lost ancient technology, then you're going to ask, well, what happened to it, right? Or who has the knowledge now, and why aren't they sharing it? And I think that's the stuff they want to keep us from, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. It's funny because Bryan and I just did a podcast talking about Tucker Carlson when him and Roseanne. I don't know if you heard the quote where he was like discussing if the possibility the Nephilim are behind all the kind of chaos in the world today. And then Tucker says, the one thing we do know is all the things we don't know is like, why doesn't academia have the humility to say, we don't know how they built the pyramids? And then Roseanne immediately snaps back and says, because we do know. And I think that, to me, I think that like, obviously you get to be a conspiracy theorist when you start saying those kind of things, but I mean, obviously, if they're willing to say these things that obviously make no sense. I mean, because when they've tried, when they've tried to use the tools they say they did, they try to use the techniques that they claim, they don't get very far. Like, they don't get very far. They don't get very far at all. So I guess their question is like, and I know that Bryan and I were like, had a couple questions for you. Like, let's just stay in Egypt. And so how do you think they built the pyramids? Because I think I really just say I don't know, but I'm curious what people's thoughts are on that.
Yeah, like what do you think? I'm curious what your thought is. Like, was it a technology that they had, like, or was it just like power tools, or was there some kind of supernatural technology that they were utilizing? Like, have you come up with a conclusion or come to some under perspective? Because have you seen the one that looks like there's claw marks in the megalithic? I mean, I saw in your video, where it looks like claw marks, and you're like, what is that? Like, anyways.
Yeah, I mean, that's really the $1 million question, especially in Egypt, is how did they build this? And I think, honestly, it's a combination of things. I mean, you get around the Great Pyramids right there in Giza, and you can see literally all over, surrounding the pyramids, in the granite, in the basalt, you see laser-like cuts. And that's a lot of what's on my channel. If you scroll it, you're going to see, close-up 4K video of these cuts. And in some places, like at Karnak, there's massive core drill holes. And I'm going to feature a video soon. But I mean, this thing had to be this big. And you can see the precision with which, it was rotating. And this is ancient. I mean, in an ancient piece of limestone. And it's eroded, but I mean, it's still so precision. You can still see most of it, right? So they definitely had some kind of machine type tools. When you go to the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, there's probably 1 million artifacts in there. But my favorite artifact in that whole massive museum, and I've done videos on this as well, you can find on my Instagram or YouTube, is this granite box. It's probably 50 tons. It's just a big old rectangle box. On one side, the right side, it's precision hollowed out. On the left side, you can see where the ancients were literally sawing it, slicing it like butter, and then stopped. And
was it like a circle blade?
It was like they had a rotating circle blade at the top and one at the bottom coming down to meet in the middle. And in the middle, you see where the blade turned. Incredible. They definitely, I believe, 100% had ancient technology that was in the form of tools. But then I also think there's a connection with sonic resonance. And I mean, it's crazy. You can see, you can Google or search sonic resonance on YouTube, and you'll see videos of people lifting stones on these machines that are resonating, frequencies. And so there's definitely a link with that. And I think that's likely more centered around the movement, how they moved and lifted the stones. But you go in the Great Pyramid, this thing is so massive, but it feels like a machine inside. It's not just, a triangle lump of blocks. I mean, it's like precision crafted inside these chambers that you descend down that are 300 feet long. I often say it's hard enough doing that with a just yourself on the, grabbing the railings. Imagine how would the dynastic Egyptians do that with no railings, no stairs,
Right.
carrying massive sarcophaguses and statues, doubled over, right? It's just not
Like the
functional.
Seraphim coffin.
That's interesting. The one thing I want to stick with what you just were saying, though, that like whether okay, so it's obviously Bryan and I's belief based on like the mythologies around the world that a lot of the older people, like the natives at the time, would say the giant race of giants did these things. Okay, so giants might explain how some heavy things got moved, but like it does not really explain how they cut things. Because I mean, just them being big and strong does not mean they would be exact cutting. And there's so many examples of Egypt that things look machined. And I think like what Bryan was just talking about, I think is it the Serapeum where they have those gigantic boxes, and it defies all like understanding of mine to like. So not only are they huge, but if you guys have to see this, you guys have not. The space seems not big enough for them to ever maneuver these things. Like, how in the world did they get them in the places? And I thought that one of the crazier things, and I think this is that's a great example of the dynastic Egyptians did not do these things, because there's like hieroglyphics like almost scratched on, and they're not even straight. Like, there's they look like they were scratched onto these immaculate looking like polished granite boxes. And it's like, so obviously the people who made the boxes did not put the hieroglyphics on, otherwise they would have been perfect, just like the things were. And I think I was watching a show about this, and they were trying to figure out what was inside the boxes, and they literally dynamited it. They blew a hole in the thing because they could not lift the lids off. Now, okay, so now wrap your mind around that. So we're the advanced ones, right? We're not the cavemen. We couldn't get the lid off, so we blew a hole in the box, and of course there was nothing in there.
Just to look inside.
Right.
So so what do you think? Like how did they get those things in there? Like, I mean, that's to me, that's just like, that's one of those mind benders. Like, how did they do that?
And one of the things is, weren't the lids on majority of them were already cracked open, and except for the one that they blew up. And I'm curious what you think was inside them also.
Yeah. On my last trip there in May, I felt like I learned some new nuggets of truth on the whole Serapeum, which was rocking my world. So I'll share it here. And in this, I'm stealing this from Muhammad Ibrahim, our tour guide, who's, I think, one of the greatest guides of Egypt. He's an Egyptologist, the only one that's broken with the mainstream that I know of, and believes a far earlier civilization built all this. And by the way, he just wrote a book called Egypt Before Written History, which is a must read. Just came out.
Oh, good. That's awesome.
So to have his knowledge in book form is just priceless. So yeah, I was grilling him on the Serapeum, because again, you're just dumbfounded. You're in the subterranean underground labyrinth. There's about 25 of these massive black boxes, precision cut. They weigh about 100 tons each. They have a body that's about 70 tons and a lid that's about 30 tons. And I mean, you get on top of these and around them, and the scale, your jaw's hitting the floor. So, and then like you said, these enclosures are only about 2 feet wider than the boxes themselves. Mainstream says, that an army of men, thousands of men drug these down, right? There's no way an army of men could even move in this tight space.
Right.
So Muhammad believes what happened here is that he calls them the pre-diluvian ancient Egyptians. Okay, so we're talking about the original.
But let me stop you just right there, because that's been my theory. I think that's what might have been my theory, and that's kind of like what we say in Ancient Angels, is that I believe that the best stuff, the craziest stuff, was before the flood, because that makes sense, and that's why, like, if I'm getting what his book might be about, is he before written history? When would that be? That would be. Pre-flood.
Pre-flood, yeah. I mean, he believes it was, long, long ago, minimum of, he would say 12,000 minimum years ago. So these pre-Diluvian ancient Egyptians were the OGs.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, a side note, one of the most amazing parts of megalithic Egypt are these statues. You know, we've got the pyramids, we've got megalithic temples like the Valley Temple, which is a megalithic marvel. And then we've got these statues that most people don't realize were created by the pre-Diluvian ancient Egyptians and depict them. So like at Memphis, there's a massive multi-ton statue at a site called the Ramesseum. Is a statue. It's only the head, shoulders, and torso that's left, and it's 1,000 tons. The thing's got muscle tone on it, made from one single piece of granite.
1,000 tons. So that's over 1,000,000 pounds.
Yeah, and this thing, these were these pre-Diluvian Golden Age rulers. This is what they looked like. So the dynastic Egyptians of 3000 BC came along right after all this knowledge was lost in the Cataclysm. And with the knowledge they still had left, they were trying to rebuild and repurpose every site, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. Well, it's funny because like biblically, I believe that obviously if you look in the genealogies, well, Egypt was one of the sons of Canaan, I believe, right? Was it Canaan? Yeah. Or was one of Ham's sons? But like, the point is like, like based on like the timeline that they give you in the Bible, like they didn't have time to build all the stuff that's in Egypt. Like just kind of knowing like your biblical history. So like, there's a reason they're called the Egyptians is because there was a man named Egypt. So like, it stands to reason that obviously after Noah's Ark and Mount Ararat and the peoples moved, obviously some people found, like Egypt's people found the land of Egypt, but obviously it wasn't called Egypt. And the Egyptians didn't call themselves Egyptians, right? What do they call themselves? Didn't they, or they called the antediluvian Egyptians?
Yeah. I mean, I'm blanking. What's the name? Yeah, there's different names. I mean, it's crazy when you get into the Egyptian creation myths. It's so crazy how closely it even resembles the creation story in the Bible. Like the Egyptians believed in creation, and so they talk about the 5 cycles of the sun, and you got all these different dynasties. But again, the crazy thing is. Zep Tepi is what they call like the first time.
Yeah, that's
that
right.
Goes
the first time.
way back. So I don't want to forget talking about the the boxes. So Muhammad's theory is that this was being built by these pre-Diluvian Egyptians, and they had literally created the enclosures. And they had created these boxes, and inside the boxes were housing pieces of meteorites. And because it's all connected to Orion. And so, and if you study the Apis bull, which is big in Egypt, like the mainstream says that these were just holding bulls, dead bulls.
And did they find any bulls? In any of the
no, there's bulls outside though, isn't there? There's like a cavern of bulls.
I don't believe they ever found bulls, but the deeper meaning is the bull of the sky. That's another word for the constellation. And so these were likely housing meteorites. Well, what happened according to Muhammad is literally it's like they were working in this underground factory when the cataclysm hit. And boom, it was buried under the sands of time. And that's why there's boxes that are literally half finished in there. And so it's kind of like a Lord of the Rings, the Mines of Moria. It's like they were working away and this cataclysm hit, and the humanoids or whatever you want to call them, giants inside, were wiped out. And now, I think it was until the 1860s that this labyrinth was found again.
Right. That's wild. Cause it's interesting too. Cause because obviously the Serapeum is obviously not alone. Like I'm not sure where it's at, because obviously I've only seen the pictures. Isn't there like a massive obelisk in Egypt that's like basically finished on three sides, and yet it's still attached to the bedrock, and it doesn't really, once again, like the bedrock and like the depth it goes down, there's not a lot of room between the what looks to be almost a finished obelisk in the sides. Like how the heck did they cut that thing into the bedrock, and how are they going to get it out? Like, but it looks like that's an example of it. And also I think in Baalbek, there's what they call it, was it the stone of the pregnant woman? Is that the
Yep.
one that's, and isn't that what they said? They estimate that one to be 1,400 tons, and they try to attribute that to the Romans, and they said the Romans made this thing, and then they realized it was too heavy to get out, so they just left it. And you're like, oh, wait, if they cut the whole thing, why wouldn't they just cut it smaller? couldn't they have just made it smaller and then cut it out? Because somebody obviously cut it. But I guess the point being, there's these examples around the world of, like, why did they stop? Like, why didn't they finish these projects they seem like they're obviously right in the middle of?
Yeah, you mentioned the massive blocks there in Lebanon. And again, if the Romans built that, and Lebanon's pretty far from where the center of Rome was, why isn't there any blocks of that scale near Rome? There isn't. Why would they go all the way out to Baalbek in Lebanon and do this? Yeah, the Aswan quarry, that is one of the absolute smoking guns of lost ancient technology. The Aswan quarry. Now, this is a fact that'll blow your mind. Aswan is about a 10-hour car drive from Giza, where the Great Pyramids are. Okay, 10-hour car drive, but that's the only place where the rose granite in Egypt is in Aswan, 10 hours south. All the rose granite used to make the megaliths that came from Aswan. So, like inside the Holy of Holies in the Great Pyramid, the King's Chamber is made out of rose granite. That came from a 10-hour car drive away, right? So the scale, the distance is so epic. And so again, the one of the big $1 million questions is how did they move these megaton blocks a 10-hour car drive? Now mainstream says, well, they just they somehow got them into boats on the Nile and they sailed up the Nile. If again, the weight of these things would flatten any ship in a heartbeat, let alone the problem of getting it onto a wooden boat.
And then getting it off the boat as well.
Right? And so like this Aswan quarry houses the unfinished obelisk that you mentioned. It's at least 1,200 tons. And
unreal.
You can literally walk alongside of it like I did, and I've got videos of this. And literally, it's like that might have been when the Cataclysm hit because they stopped. They have it cut out on all three sides except the bottom. But the crazy thing is, I say smoking gun of lost ancient tech because you get up close and this is where you see they had a massive tool. And you'd have to kind of see my video or pictures to really visualize this. But they had a tool that could go down into the rose granite and melt it like butter. And then scoop underneath and out. That's what it does, 1 meter all the way along and the entire side of the whole thing. It goes down, up, and out. Literally like they were scooping with a special crane. And you see these 1 meter divots all the way around it, right? So no chisel could do that on a meter, at least a 2-foot wide thing, right? And so it's like, again, some people theorize there was a chemistry element involved in that could soften it. That might be true, but they definitely had some tool that could do the heavy lifting. And
okay,
go ahead.
Oh, I gotta ask you because this is super interesting. So the have you heard the theory or concept that potentially demons helped build some of this stuff? I don't know if you've ever heard that concept.
Demons. I haven't really got heard much about that.
Okay, so this is an occult book, probably not one people should read, but it's called The Lesser Keys of Solomon. And in it, Solomon utilizes demons that he imprisons to build things like the temple and some other stuff.
Like literally
And it's a
the temple and God's temple.
yes, and there's actually one of the further stories alluded to that is actually a story of Christmas. Actually, like Santa Claus is a representation of imprisoning demons, which are elves, and he uses them to build toys. That's actually paying homage to the prelude story of the Lesser Key of Solomon. Again, this is a cult book. Wouldn't recommend reading it, but like it's very fascinating because there's a lot of stuff connecting to it, like the Freemasons, which why they call themselves Freemason. They also worship Solomon, and Solomon was the builder of the Masonic structures, the megalithic structures. And so it's very fascinating when you see these also these doorways that you see like in Petra, those doors that are just like they're like set in the rock, and there's rooms behind it, but it's solid rock and it's like pushed in. And I know that we've like busted through some of these like looking like doorway archways that like pushed in, and we found rooms behind it, and we're like, like how was there a solid rock sealed part of the rock that looks like a little inset, and then there's a room behind it, unless there was some type of a technology or power or perhaps demonic power that could melt through the rock, that could go through the rock. And part of my theory is that I've come to see that like these are demonic doorways. You've ever heard of like, trolls turn to stone, or Medusa will turn you to stone. You hear like a lot of demonic things attached to the ability of turning things into stone. So it's interesting to see that could they possibly potentially have some demonic power that allows them to change the matter of stone to pass through it, or to pull it out, or to move it, and it's some kind of, I don't know, demonic potential power, which I don't know if you've ever heard or seen any theories on that, but I find it very fascinating.
That is fascinating and interesting. Again, I'm a
Mm-hmm.
definite believer in the Nephilim, and so I do
Mm-hmm.
believe there's an element where giants are involved, especially with the Cyclopean ruins in Europe, where the
Mm-hmm.
Cyclops originates.
Mm-hmm.
In Italy there. Um, that's fascinating because the Cyclopean ruins are different than what you see in Peru and Egypt. They're massive, but they just have a different look. And it's like the Cyclopean ruins in Italy were just literally hurled together by massive, beastly giants. And I really believe that is the case. If you look at the Cyclopean ruins in Italy, like at Alatri, if you people want to Google that, they're not as precision, but they're
Mm-hmm.
just on a massive scale. So I do believe there's an element of giants. I mean, if anyone's honest and they look at these oral traditions of these cultures all over, they all talk about giants. And I definitely want to talk about giants because I know that's something you wanted to talk about, JT.
Yeah,
And I've got
absolutely. That's what I was thinking. The one thing I was thinking, like when Brian was even mentioned. So the interesting part about like biblically, it actually mentions that like Solomon had them cut stuff like not in the temple. They didn't want hammering and chiseling inside the temple. So they said like similar to like what you kind of see in examples of like that they were it's like in Egypt obviously they were cutting the things like how they wanted them and then they didn't pull out a big block and then carve it in place. They already did that. So that's kind of interesting. But I was thinking to whether the demons can be evolved. Well, if you do believe the Nephilim were responsible for some of these things, we know that when they died, based on Enoch, they became unclean spirits. So perhaps is it possible that they were, people could get knowledge of how things were done through literally the people, not the people or whatever they were who did that. But so, I mean, so yeah, I think that the Cyclops thing is interesting because it's like, yeah, that's what I wonder. Like that, if you think about like this, just like the mythology of Atlantis, like so, Poseidon has 10 sons, and then later, like the divine spirit dwindles and they become more corrupt. And so I think that like when I'm thinking of corrupt, Nephilim, I'm thinking like Cyclops, these deformed giants, and to me, it's like, yeah, is that like the guys who built Stonehenge? They got these big rough stones and they stuck them together somehow. But I almost picture like the original Nephilim, the very first ones. Is it perhaps that those were more like what you'd see in Greek mythology, the demigods who look like you and I, except they're better. They're superior beings, or they obviously were smart, talented,
Yeah, and
all the
that's what.
things.
And one other side note on Egypt, like again, Muhammad Ibrahim, our guide, would call these the builders of the pyramids the pre-diluvian ancient Egyptians. And a lot of people with a biblical worldview who understand the Nephilim, yeah, you can kind of get into a box of thinking they were just some big, nasty, gnarly brute.
Mm-hmm.
But like you're saying, I think especially the original ones were like Greek gods.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what the sense you get when you look at these statues of these ancient Egyptians.
Mm-hmm.
They have crazy features, and
Mm-hmm.
it's like they had supernatural abilities, yet it's like they knew how the earth functioned. They knew
Right.
more, they knew about the ley lines and the magnetism and the geology. And if you know a lot of that stuff, and you might not know who created it, right? But if
Mm-hmm.
you get the fundamentals, there's a lot you can do. Um, just in a holistic sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I totally get what you're saying. So yeah, there's so much going on, and I definitely want to talk about giants. Where do you want to start?
I mentioned on our last podcast we talked about Cholula, and according to the Spanish, the Aztecs told them the Cholula pyramids were built by giants. Obviously, before they were around, it's like the Indian and American Indian legends. So they came up out of the earth, and there was giants everywhere. They built all the crazy stuff, and then eventually the sky god rained down on them, and then they killed them all. And it's like, where have I heard that story before? Have you? Do you have any other examples of stories like that are very similar to straight up Genesis 6 and 7, crazy giants, and then a God judged this place?
Yeah, I mean, I was just in Peru in October, and when you start getting into their oral traditions, it's crazy because they believe very similar to Cholula there. Um, they the Inca had different gods, but the main creator deity was, Viracocha or Veracocha, and he was like the creator god, right? Well,
Mm-hmm.
their oral traditions basically state that, he created everything. Um, I think the tradition goes he even created the giants, but then the giants began to devour humanity, and so there was a flood that wiped out the giants. I mean, this is in the
Wow.
Quechuan traditions, the Inca traditions, and then
Wow.
the earth had to start over. And you're sitting there going, "Wow!"
Mm-hmm.
And with Peru, though, to me, it goes to a whole nother level because we've got, again, I keep using the word smoking gun. I believe we've got the smoking gun of uh, Nephilim evidence with these Paracas elongated skulls.
Oh yeah.
You go
Mm-hmm.
see these things up close, and then, man, on this last trip, I did a whole new deep dive into, again, these Inca oral traditions. And so, I guess for people, I'll just give a quick little recap who might not know a whole lot about these skulls. So, like in 1920, in the 20s, um, there was a Peruvian archaeologist who started to discover these massive elongated skulls down there near Paracas on the coast, the west coast of Peru. And these all date from about 2 to 3,000 years old. And so most people have seen images of these by now, and Peru is cool because it's, if they were found in the U.S., they'd be hidden away, right? But you can go there and
There'd be
and
an
see them up,
Indiana Jones warehouse at the end.
right?
They'd be right next to
Yeah.
the Lost Ark.
So again, the mainstream says, "Oh, well, these were just cradle headboarded," meaning when they're a baby, you squish the head together. So what's going on is, and where people get confused is, you've got two different kinds of elongated skulls. You've got the natural elongated skulls, like these Paracas skulls, meaning they're genetically born like this. And they were the ruling class. They were the ruling class priests of the civilization back then. And then you've got the everyday Joes, humans, archaic humans who were trying to emulate them. So they were cradle headboarding their kids, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
They wanted to look like them.
They wanted to look like
that's
them.
the reason why they did it.
Yeah, and these naturally elongated skulls, I mean, have all these genetic anomalies, huge eye sockets, larger jaws. They're missing suture lines in the back of the head like we've got. The craziest one is the foramen magnum. That's where our neck attaches to the head. And on humans, it's right in the middle center of the skull. Theirs is all the way to the back. So their neck attaches kind of at the back of the skull. You can't do that. That's genetic, right? And so all these crazy anatomical genetic differences. And again, these were the nobles and the royalty of the Paracas culture. Now, the crazy thing is, the Paracas die out about 2,000, 3,000 years ago. Well, they became, I believe, the Inca. When you hear the word Inca, people falsely assume that just was everybody that lived, in the 13th century. No, Inca just means the nobles, the ruling class.
Interesting.
So the Inca had dark red hair like the Paracas and elongated skulls. And again, if you look at these skulls, on average, I would say their skulls are about 25% larger than ours. Some go up to 50%.
Gosh.
The point is, cradle headboarding can't add more mass to a skull, right?
Absolutely.
And so you see these. Now, here's the crazy part that I learned on this last trip. So all these megalithic sacred places around Peru, again, I believe the Inca came upon them and found them. And they thought that these were the habitation of the gods. So the Inca made them into these sacred spots. Well, the Inca collected religiously all these elongated skulled mummies of this previous ruling class. And on the solstice, June 21st, I believe, it was, their holiest day, they would bring out these elongated skulled mummies, place them in these precision megalithic cutouts that look like portals or stargates.
Wow.
And when the sunlight would hit these at a specific time in the solstice, guess what would happen? And again, this is according to the Inca. This isn't me making this up.
They'd take them up or they would resurrect them.
These entities would speak to them.
Oh my goodness.
And give them, they would give them laws. They would tell them what to do. And is that not insane?
That is insane. But I mean, like it's interesting. I kept on thinking to you as well, like that. I looked at one of your previous videos about like Nefertiti and like the Egyptians who had the elongated skulls too. And you're like you were correct when you're like, okay, so if they were cradle headboarding these babies, who were they emulating? I mean, were the people in South America emulating the Egyptians? Or like, obviously that to me, that's obviously insane. But I mean, like, to me, like, they obviously recognize these people were partially divine. Otherwise, it's more than just old kings, unless the kings came from some place that made them superior to them. Like, why would you think a mummy could do that unless they believe that they were somewhat angelic
gods or something?
Possibly.
Yeah, so I was going to tell you, you know how like they were sacrificing over in the Aztec temples, like they were killing people at all the pyramids, right? And so a lot of people don't recognize, but I've come to the understanding, I think that the pyramids in Egypt were also similar sacrificial points. I don't know if you've ever got that feel or thought that at all, but I think, I mean, they were sacrificing people at all the other pyramids in the world. Why wouldn't they be sacrificing them in Egypt? And there's those pools and channels that you see throughout the area. And you're like, what are these little shallow pools for, if not to be filled with water and then sacrifice someone, have their blood run through it? You know what I mean? Or, and it's very ritualistic looking. And I would imagine that they would even put mummies in that same situation and try to, kill some people, drain their blood, let it flow through, and then, come through, because they were doing that in the Aztec pyramids. And you see it in their writings. You see them saying, sacrifice the people to gain the entity, the gods that show up to give them secret knowledge. I mean, like, where'd they get their perfect calendar from? It came from the gods. They were making sacrifices of people to the gods and doing this kind of ritual practice. Like, I wonder if, like you were saying, if those pools were not filled with blood of people when that mummy started talking almost. I know it sounds really disturbing and dark, but when you look into it, you see that recognition of blood, like being like passed through things. I don't know what your view on that would be.
Absolutely. With the Inca, the Inca were sadly bloodthirsty and did all kinds of sacrifice, child sacrifice. It's pretty dark when you really start looking into it. And again, it all goes back to their worship of Viracocha, who has all these crazy oral traditions attached to him as well. How he appeared. I almost wonder, again, speaking of giants and Nephilim, when these watchers descended, Genesis 6 forces they are there before the flood and after, right? So they get wiped out with a flood. There's some kind of second incursion. I lean towards they just came down the way they did the first time. Don't know that for sure, but we know they came back. But did they come back at multiple locations? Did they descend in Palestine a second time? Did they descend over here in South America, right? And because according to the Inca and these oral traditions, Viracocha was almost this tall, white-skinned deity, right?
Right.
But he was good, and he was teaching them civilization and how to build, and almost kind of Nimrod-like, right? And then he vanishes, right? But obviously Viracocha is the one teaching, sacrifice. And did you guys ever hear the story I shared about the megalithic cave, where a crazy thing happened by the portal?
I don't think
Which
so.
one? Oh, were you interviewing somebody?
Well, I've shared this a couple places, so I don't ever want to share the same stories too often, but it might be relevant for what we're talking about. So again, Peru is this megalithic paradise as far as looking for evidence of lost ancient tech. You've got the famous sites like Machu Picchu and Sacsayhuaman that most people go to, but what makes Peru special is, like, in the middle of nowhere, in this mountainous ravine, way up this mountainside, is a cave. I'll never forget the first time I went there with Brian Forster. He's like, we're going way off grid. Be ready to hike. And so we go through this valley, hike way up the side of this, this mountain face. And this is in the Andes. And you can see up in the distance this massive cave. And down below, as you're hiking up, you see all these Inca ruins, and you're thinking, okay, why are the Inca building here? Obviously, they thought this is a special place. And so you get up into this cave. And even on this last trip, the guides get real kind of superstitious before you go in there. And so the first time I went, this guy was wanting to spray us all with a special incense and make sure we were clean so we didn't offend the spirits.
Oh my goodness.
And I'm thinking, what am I getting myself into? So we get into this cave. Inside the cave, and you can see, again, pictures of this on my Instagram, is on one side what looks like a megalithic Stargate that goes straight into the mountain, laser cut out of, again, this is like granite, just laser cut, like 4D. It's got, this door has got like 4 layers to it. And then on the front of the site is this, what looks like an altar, precision cut. And so our minds are blown. After we'd looked around for a while, the guide, he was also kind of like this, he was an ancestor of the Inca. And so, or he was, from the Inca lineage, and he wanted us to just take in, this sacred spot. So he pulled out his drum. He said, everybody just sit here and meditate and just welcome in the spirit
Oh,
as I basically
Demons.
worship, right? So he starts playing his drum and he's singing and some people are just meditating. I'm sitting there going, oh man, what is going on? And it was actually peaceful for like a minute until we heard a blood curdling scream.
Oh my gosh.
And this guy in our group is screaming for his life, literally scared to death. He was from India, but he's like turning white. And so, of course, everybody is like, what's going on? We rush over to this guy and he's just flailing his arms like he's being attacked. And so, I mean, this is literally scaring people. And finally he settles down and guess what he shares? He says that when I was meditating and welcoming the spirits, a puma came out of the portal and entered me.
Oh my gosh.
And we were just like,
that's a demon.
So that to me was a crazy experience because it showed me the connection between in the spirit world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of this stuff is truly ancient. I believe it was made with an ancient technology, but again, if you don't know what you're doing, you can get into a lot of trouble inviting stuff if you don't know who you're covered by, right?
Yes.
And so, what do you think of that story?
Well, that's crazy. I was just thinking about that, like even like biblically, like so if like after the flood, the Israelites go into Canaan and they're purging out giants, and then like when you think about when Jesus is casting out demons in places, like he's casting them out a lot. Let's say on like the I guess it'd be the east side of the Galilee where Bashan would be, and like that would be like King Og. Like he was King Og of Bashan, and so you think about all the giants that were there, and it's like it's not a coincidence that all these demons are associated with this place that was, like from the Old Testament will tell you was filled with giants. So then, you go over to Peru and then you see these things that obviously you cannot explain, megalithic things. And it's like, I was actually just thinking that like, cause obviously to me, I'm jealous when I hear that you go to these places. Cause I'm like, I want to go, but then I guess you don't think about it because I was actually kind of like getting the vibe you're going with early because I was thinking like you're going this place way off the grid. Obviously, this place is kind of spooky altogether, and then people start telling you to do this, and I'm like, no, I don't. I want to go back because it's like because it's like inviting the spirits. Like spirits of what? Like why would you assume that they're all nice?
What?
Let me share something. This is hilarious.
Yeah.
This is okay. So like honestly, bro, like I don't know how much you know about what I do, but I cast demons out. So like I'm like an exorcist. So I deal with this kind of stuff pretty regularly. Like 2 days ago, I dealt with a person screaming at the top of their lungs just by praying quietly, and all of a sudden the thing manifests. So this is my normal day. The minute you began to tell the story, that's why I was like demons. Like I was like I already know how they manifest. Like I've already seen it. Like people do these kind of rituals and they go smoke ayahuasca and they think they're like channeling the spirits and they throw up. Well, guess what happens when I pray for people and demons leave them? They throw up. Okay. So it's a pretty common, and you don't have to eat cigarettes or nothing. I just say the name of Jesus and bam, like the demon will manifest. It'll come out of the person. But this is how you get demons. You go to these places and you worship. Okay. People don't understand what worship is, but when that dude pulled out his drum, you were participating in a worship ceremony unto the spirits. And like, if you read again, the Lesser Key of Solomon, not to bring it up again, but because it's not it's a cult book you shouldn't read. But what I will tell you is he asks the demons, where do they reside? And they say in the caverns and in the forests and in the hills hidden among the rocks, like in the areas where people don't go. And that's like one of the responses, like the demons basically say, we hide in the forest and we're waiting, and they wait for people to come and then they attack them. Okay. And so like the demon straight up says that this happens. Like it says that is what they do. And so like, you go to this ancient site where the megaliths, where the Nephilim entities once ruled, their deceased bodies, they're hanging around somewhere doing nothing, waiting. You show up and come and give it an offering. You burn sage. People don't know what burning sage is. Like when you burn like smoke and you burn those things, Those are burned offerings. You've heard of burned offerings unto the Lord, right? You know, like you burn an offering. Yeah. What do you think you're burning when you smoke a cigarette or when you burn like sage? Like you're burning an offering unto something. You just don't know what. And so when you're going there and they're starting to smoke and do the burned offering thing, you're setting yourself up for demonic experience, like 100%. And then he goes over there and starts playing the drum. You're giving an offering. You're worshiping the demon. Yeah, of course it's going to show up. Of course it's going to show up. Maybe it might. And like, obviously that dude who had attacked was somebody that didn't have the Lord in him, probably was like, you know, believed in Hinduism or who knows what, if he's from India, you know, and then like, you know, you're a viable entity to be entered. And so the entity came out, probably jumped into it. You know, the saddest part is that guy probably had a personality shift ever since that event. And it's really sad. That dude needs to be prayed for, probably. And so, but like, he probably had a total personality shift there. Probably went back and his family was probably like, you know, why are you acting a little bit weird? And like, he probably doesn't even know what it is, but there's something else like went into him. That's how demons go into people. They merge with you and they affect little parts of your personality and you don't even recognize it. People think they're just like, oh no, demon's not in me. It's like, watch, we'll pray and like that thing will come out. And like the things that when we pray, dude, they'll start talking through people, which blew my mind when I first saw it. I like didn't believe it. I was like, are you kidding me? Like, dude, they straight up start talking through people's mouths against their will. Like against the person's like, I don't know why I'm saying that. And then it'll be like, and it'll start speaking like ancient languages. You're like, whoa, like, it's pretty real. So yeah, that's definitely a setup for demonic possession. For sure. I'd be concerned for that guy. So if he needs prayer, if he's listening,
I should state, you know, that first time when that happened, I was just on the tour. It wasn't my tour. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The cool thing is on this last tour, we went to that site again because I wanted to see this. And our guide wanted, you know, again, because the Inca, they considered this one of the most sacred sites. So even the guides that know the real history still do too. And our guide wanted to kind of have a ceremony in there, and I pulled everybody aside. And I said, I pulled him aside and the whole group. I said, I want to tell you a little story about what happened last time I was here. Let's just say it scared the hell out of them.
Yeah.
And nobody wanted to do any meditation in there.
Well, good.
So that was pretty cool.
Well, that's good.
Good.
The only thing as Bryan mentioned too, and I was curious about this. I got a question, and this was kind of, I wasn't really preparing to talk about this, but I did a video recently talking about ayahuasca. And so I believe that there's multiple ways where like the thinning of the veil, kind of being able to contact entities, you know, like the spiritual entities. What I thought was interesting was like, I'm not sure which video I saw it, and I saw some content creator trying to tie like the ancient petroglyphs or whatever of like the beings, like the seraphim or whatever they're showing, like Quetzalcoatl, different kind of, and they're holding these little things that almost look like purses. And somebody made the connection that is it possible that those things are symbolic of some kind of the medicine, perhaps?
Yeah, drug bag.
Yeah, is that? Have you heard anything about that? And also just ayahuasca in general, that kind of how normal it is out where you're going to these megalithic sites.
Yeah, you know, I definitely have heard that theory too with the handbags or the ancient purses, if you want to call them that maybe that is what is inside is some form of ayahuasca. I've also heard that this, you know, just represents the sacred knowledge they had. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, it's, you know, on all these trips, you're going to have people that are into the ayahuasca and into that stuff. And, you know, you got guys like Graham Hancock. He's all about it.
Yeah.
That's TX that he's doing with all that experiments.
You know, he happens to also believe that there was a worldwide flood, and he believes, I think, in giants. But so I'll give him two of the three there.
That's what I said. He said some interesting things, but it was interesting. He was tying like literally the ayahuasca to like entities, and he like, I think it was his theory that like this is they're seeing geometric shapes, and is it possible that they're getting this mind expansion?
Yeah.
And knowledge of doing things through literally the vine of the dead, which is again like ancestor. You know, this whole idea of ancestor worship. When we realize, like, your and I ancestors are dead, they're not coming back. We're not talking to their spirits. So like, so when you're speaking to the ancestors, they're not the ancestors probably of yours, unless it's just like this mythology of your culture had ancestors that were higher beings. Because otherwise, why are you trying to contact just people who died? Like, they're trying to contact the superior beings, like probably the same thing with like the elongated skull, and trying to resurrect them in order to get like guidance.
Yeah, it's in Egypt. I was just going to say real quick, in Egypt, you know, when you go into these temples, everywhere you see depicted is the blue lotus, which Graham Hancock and many theorize this was like ayahuasca or their version of it. And it's like, you know, it did thin the veil and allow them to see things they wouldn't normally see and communicate with what they called the gods, right? But yeah, you see the blue lotus symbolized everywhere, and the recipe's been lost, just so people know. People have tried to find it and make it, and nobody can. So the blue lotus recipe is gone. But yeah, it's like it was their version of an ayahuasca, and you mentioned also, Brian. I wanted to mention, you know, the function of the pyramids. You know, maybe the dynastic Egyptians of 3000 BC who came along and repurposed it. Maybe they did do some sacrifices in there. And, you know, these pharaohs, the dynastic pharaohs, again, the guys that were only 3000 BC, they thought of these ancient megalithic pyramids as like the greatest pieces of technology on earth. So they wanted to be buried in them. So if they were a tomb at all, it was just a repurposed tomb, because it was like a ticket to the afterlife for the pharaoh. But again, you get in it and it feels so mechanical. I lean towards its original purpose might have been that of an ancient energy generator of sorts that powered the civilization. Again, when you combine and when you look at the geology and the water erosion inside, it was likely filling with water from the base. So all kinds of crazy theories, but giants certainly. I'm sure you guys know all about, you know, even giants found in North America, right?
Oh yeah, I think we're actually we've done 2 parts of Ancient Angels, and we're like, that's one of the things we might feature, like the mythologies, and like obviously the explorers' tales of giants, and obviously like all the American Indian tales of giants.
One of the, I find it fascinating. One of the giant tribes, or one of the tribes when they came over here, is the Abenaki Indians. Have you heard of that? It's kind of comical because it sounds a little bit like Anunnaki.
Yeah. Sure does.
It's like Abenaki, and I wonder if that's so connected. I find it very fascinating. You know, Graham Hancock too. When you mention it, he was talking about the drug, the DMT-X experience. When he was saying people were going into that realm, they're all encountering the snake-headed being. I don't know if you read any of his work about the snake-head being.
Deities.
You see it all over. And the DMT-X, apparently it extends the experience, the drug experience, to like 20 minutes when it's normally 7. And then people that are doing this are all encountering the same being. Some people encounter it while on mushroom trips and other drug-related trips, but this is all going into the spiritual realm, I believe, and I think it's very dangerous and very foolish to go there. But you know, people are doing these things going into this realm, but they encountered it. He actually got the name for it from some of the ancient stuff, and it's Azazel. It's Azazel, which is the name of the angel.
He was a bad one.
And so that bad fallen angel, like, you know, so he's like, Azazel is the name of the entity that they're encountering, who's got like snakes all over his body. And interestingly,
the scapegoat.
We go back to the seraphim, okay, or the Serapeum, but the seraphim are also angels, and then the seraphim coffins, and then you've got this connection here that you're like, that's weird. But seraphim also means snake, okay, and so Azazel, they're like saying, is he also a fallen angel, but is he also somehow interconnected with the snake entity component, which is so fascinating. I don't know have you heard of any of that, or what
Yeah.
your understanding from that is? But it's fascinating.
I even I was talking recently with a friend who has a podcast, and we were talking a little bit about this whole DMT subject.
Mm-hmm.
And this person shared how um, they did this, before conversion, and the first thing they saw, was basically Quetzalcoatl and
Wow.
I'm surfing.
the feathered serpent. They said that's the first entity they saw, and it was the most often entity they saw, and that blew my mind. Firsthand
Yes.
experience from someone I trust.
Crazy.
Have you guys heard of?
Mm.
Speaking of North American giants, the Lovelock legends.
Oh
Yeah,
yes.
isn't that the one where the Indians supposedly, the American Indians supposedly like forced or like they burned
Yeah.
They
these
found the
giants
shoe.
inside
They
a
found the
cave
shoe.
inside of. Where's that?
Mhm.
Was that in Utah or?
That was in Nevada. Yeah.
Okay.
Close. Yeah.
That's a crazy story to check out if you want. I've actually done a whole blog series on it. People can go to stargatevoyager.com and type in Lovelock and you'll find it. But that's one of my favorite legends of giants when it comes to North America, because it's got all these great pieces. You've got the oral tradition of the Paiute Indians. They lived in northwestern Nevada. And so they had always had this legend of these red-haired cannibalistic giants that they called the Sitika. And their legends state that they at one point came together as a coalition of tribes to exterminate the giants because they were literally devouring them. And so they trapped them in this cave, set it ablaze with fire, and wiped them out. So that was all just thought to be a fancy tale until I think it was in the late 1800s, the daughter of the Paiute chief, Winnemucca, wrote a book called Life Among the Paiutes. Her name was Sarah Winnemucca. And in the book, she talked about the red-haired people eaters that are tribe exterminated, and how she even had a dress that was passed down generation to generation trimmed with the red hair, which is kind of crazy, right?
Oh, that's creepy.
And then in 1911 is when the story really took on a new life. A group of miners were out excavating bat guano, which is, bat dung, in these caves. And they were in what's now known as Lovelock Cave, about 93 miles northeast of Reno. And they start to discover countless artifacts, burnt arrow shafts, huge artifacts, and skeletons and skulls of giant proportion. And so this triggers the archaeologists to come out, literally from the Smithsonian and from.
They said, "Don't worry, we'll take it back to Washington. We're going to look it over thoroughly. We'll get back to you."
Yeah, so the archaeologists come out. They literally excavate like over 10,000 artifacts, and they say that they found evidence of life in there that goes back to at least 4,000 BC. Okay. And they pulled out these giant, like a pestle is like a thing Native Americans would use to grind stuff. They found pestles that are like 3 feet long. Okay. By the mouth of the cave. And they found this humanoid that looks like a Paracas skull in there. And then they found, again, the biggest find was these giant skeletons and skulls. And I've found newspaper articles from Lovelock that talk about, 7, 8, 9, even 10 footers. And so all this crazy, not just oral tradition, but you got archaeological evidence, you've got newspaper headlines. And then what's really exciting is you've got witnesses who were at this, it's called the Humboldt Museum, which is about an hour from Lovelock. And I went to this cave, and it definitely felt otherworldly. And it's charred black, the roof of the cave. And you just get the sense, man, this was ancient, because thousands of years ago, this would have been a natural defensive position because it was surrounded by a prehistoric lake. And so anyway, long story short, a lot of these skeletons and skulls that were found some of them were saved and put on display at a little museum in Humboldt, Nevada.
Hmm.
Well, these were on display up until like the early 2000s. And some people went in there and took photographs of them. And I've got them on my website, and you can see there's like 4 skulls. 3 of them look like our size, and one looks like it's belongs in the head of a 9-foot body.
Wow.
It's massive, and it's got a double row of teeth.
Mm.
And so, again, we've even got photographs, and to me, that's what makes this story so fascinating. And I've got those photos on my website. But again, Lovelock Cave, I think that is one of the best stories of giants in North America.
That's crazy. But you know what's interesting?
Did the skulls go missing?
Yeah. So where did they say the skulls went?
It's crazy. Now, when I wrote this series, this was a couple years ago. As of then, the skulls were still at the Humboldt Museum in a back room, and the curator of the museum, who's you get the sense is a critically thinking normal person. Her name, I believe, was Barbara Powell. She says, we're not allowed to put these on public display because,
come on,
the state won't let them.
Wow.
And that's why they're hidden in the back room. But last I heard, people were still able to go there and kind of try to see them. But that is an amazing story, to be sure.
Well, yeah, you know what? It's interesting to go back to one thing you said earlier when you were saying that Inca meant just like noblemen. Is that what they said? Was it noble person or something like that? Was it?
Yeah, Inca, that means
or noble ones,
the ruling class.
Yeah. So what I found interesting is like that you hear the mythologies of the Anasazi, and if you don't really know, you would think that Anasazi was a tribe of people, but Anasazi just literally means ancient ones. So it's kind of like that people know of this. There was these people before, but that's really all you know about them. You actually don't really know anything. And so like the Pueblo Indians, I believe they claim some kind of an ancestry to them. But again, it's like, isn't that kind of similar to the people who came afterwards? And yeah, like we're related to the Incas, but that's really not, that's a description of a person. That's actually not a nation of people.
Right.
And so like to think about like the Lovelock Cave stuff is like, so this was this elevated cave position that they ended up getting burned inside. But isn't it fascinating that a lot of the Anasazi structures around like North America, like out west, there are these cliff dwellings.
Yeah.
It's like, so why were they up so high? I mean, I think do you think it has something to do with like that a lot of the mythologies of the giants, they were warring against each other. It was like, so nobody liked the giants, including each other. They didn't like nobody liked the giants, and they were always at war.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't doubt that that's one of the reason peoples like the Anasazi literally built way high up. I mean, just the energy, the extra energy to build their structures up there. It's crazy. And then it's like they vanished, completely vanished off the face of the earth, like they were obliterated. So what happened to them? It's crazy to think about. And then, yeah, I think eventually the giants became the hunted, and that's why they were fleeing to places like this cave in Lovelock, which was this defensive, almost island. The giants, I believe, fled Canaan when they were being wiped out, and they went. One of the first places is likely Sardinia, this island. It's just south of Italy, in the middle of the sea, and it's literally, I mean, it's a megalithic wonder. I mean, it's called the Tombs of the Giants. They're all over that island, and they're like 20 feet long, and these 3D structures in the shape of a bull's head from the sky. And so just, it's all over, right? It's, we didn't even get to talk about Easter Island, but let me close with this, just because we said we would talk about it. So one nugget I'll give you on Easter Island, is crazy because, when people think of Easter Island, they think of the iconic Moai statues. which are awesome. A lot of people don't realize there's still a megalithic wall there that looks just like something you'd see in Cusco. Precision
Really?
mortarless megalithic wall on Easter Island. Okay, so direct link to Peru. But I personally believe these Moai statues, it's kind of like the giant statues in Egypt I talk about. They were depicting the original long-eared builders, the long ears. And so many explorers that first went to Easter Island, like in the 1600s, reported on the unusual shaped skulls and large bumps found on the back of the neck of the island's inhabitants. And if you Google like Easter Island wooden statues, you'll see how crazy they depicted these people. They all have a weird bump on the back of the neck, which again, genetics, weird skulls, weird shaped bodies. And so, again, even in the 1600s, the island's inhabitants seem to have a real weird, strange look and genetic features. But then you obviously, when you get into it, the oral traditions of the islanders state that the island was settled twice. The first time by a race known as the Long Ears, who came from the east, and the second time by the Short Ears, who came from the west. The Short Ears are, again, what mainstream focuses on. They came later. These were probably the people from Polynesia who came about 1,000 years ago. But the Long Ears appear to have been a power in the land at a far earlier time in history. And the Short Ears were like their slaves. You know, the Long Ears were the ruling class. The Short Ears were their laborers. And the Long Ears likely built the biggest Moai statues to depict themselves. And then again, these megalithic walls that you can still see. And
Interesting.
I read Thor Heyerdahl's book from like the 70s on Easter Island. And there's so much stuff I pulled from that book because it was before political correctness, and he's showing pictures, and there was megalithic walls all over this place, and it was actually like an island oasis at one point with megalithic roads. And
There was
so
roads
I think
there?
Did they?
yeah there's evidence of megalithic like highways going through the island.
So you're saying,
they
but
say,
you're
like,
saying you think that the statues that are obviously very strange and not really human-like, you believe that that's what they were depicting? That's what the people who were like really founded that place, what they look like?
Yeah, I believe the now there's newer statues
Kind of like
that have
these
been
long faces and kind of like very like long noses.
yeah
and
the original
long
They
ears
have-
too. So I didn't really think of them.
Yeah,
being
was the
long.
long ears like actually a thing? Like they're saying their ears were like long, and it was referring to their ear shape.
yeah
Go
the
long this way.
the biggest oldest original statues I believe were likely made if not by these long-eared rulers, they are at least made to depict them. You know, these were the gods, these were the ruling class. And but again, there's so much mystery surrounding them. Like if you go look at some of these statues that were abandoned, like from the quarry a couple miles away, there's no friction on their back, so they couldn't have been drug. So how, you know, it's almost like they were on it's like they were on a lev train going down. So yeah, Easter Island again, I believe giants were inhabiting that. Oh, and one last nugget, and then I'll let you go, is the craziest thing I found about Easter Island. I found the original ship logs of the first Dutch explorer that went to Easter Island. His name was Jacob Roggeveen. And you can find these online for free and, you know, read through them. And they...
Excuse me, what year was that? What was that year?
This would have been the 1600s.
Okay.
So this guy went to Easter Island in the 1600s, and he named it Easter Island because he arrived there on Easter Sunday. So that's why it's called Easter Island. A lot of people want to call it Rapa Nui. But anyway, he was talking about Easter Island and some other little islands around there that they went to. Well, guess what I find in some of these documents? On an island, I don't think it was Easter Island, but it was on one near it or on the way to it. They came across 12-foot tall natives.
12-foot tall?
Wow.
12-foot tall that basically scared them to death and were chasing them, and so they had to get out of there.
So this is what the first Europeans who got there, they claim they got there and there was 12-foot giants there.
It's right in the writings. Yes, they saw 12-foot tall, and they describe them as like super strong and fast natives.
Wow.
How crazy is that?
Dang.
That's similar to like the Native American stories about like the giants that could run with like, that kind of famous, I mean, obviously it's an illustration of like a giant that's like scooped up a buffalo. They basically said they could just run by and just grab the leg off one and start eating it.
Yeah.
Like they were just more than just, I mean, I think a lot of times people just say like, they think giants, they were like Shaq. It's like, they were more than just tall. They were like, it was more than just being big. There was something else entirely. Well, anyways,
thanks,
Derek,
man, for jumping
dude,
on.
this was so awesome having you on here. Obviously, I mean, if you're anytime you want to come back on, you got an open invitation. Tell everybody where they can find you at.
Yeah. Hey, thanks again for having me, guys. This was fun, a lot of fun. Love the topics. People can find me basically everywhere at Stargate Voyager. I got a blog, stargatevoyager.com. And then on Instagram, YouTube, it's just Stargate Voyager, X, Twitter, all the things. And if people are interested in joining me on a tour, I got Egypt coming up in May. Ooh. It's going to be epic. I've got Peru and Bolivia in August. And then I'm adding 2 tours this year. We're going to go to we're going to do an England Stonehenge tour. I think that's the end of June, and then Mexico in early November. So it's going to be crazy. So people can go to stargatevoyager.com/tours to find all that info.
Bryan, we got to go on one of these ones. It's like, I'm in if I can.
Yeah.
Am I in?
Jump along.
I'd like to be in.
I'm down.
Well, anyways, dude, like I said, it was awesome having you. I think the only problem with like conversations like this, there's too much. Like there's absolutely, I mean, obviously there's no, you can always come back because we could never cover it all. So anyways, this is awesome, man. I really appreciate it. And yeah, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this one.
Thanks again, guys. It was fun, and let's do this again. And where can I find your series to watch?
Oh, we'll off the air.
AncientAngels.com.
We'll send you AncientAngelsMovie.com. But we'll send you the code and everything, and you check it out. And obviously, it'd be cool, like maybe to collaborate one day. Like obviously, like you got like I said, I would love to just go on one of these trips because I think that just seems like. Yeah, I know that. Like I was getting the sense when you were saying this place is off the grid because like. When you see all the places that are already there, you can imagine like with these jungles and like what's there and like what they don't tell you about and what hasn't really even been discovered yet. I mean, like I know it doesn't do it any justice to just see pictures.
Right. Yeah. You got to go at some point and put your hands on it, but we just won't do any meditation. right.
Yes.
No hands on drums.
Channeling.
No drums allowed. I'm out of here.
All right, guys. Thanks so much.
All right, man. God bless, bro. Take it easy.
Okay. Bye.
Later.